Hello and welcome to this special show. CNBC TV18 and Zetwerk are bringing you a special series on PLI-led growth in IT hardware manufacturing and building India's IT hardware legacy. The centre has launched production-linked incentive schemes to promote telecom and IT hardware manufacturing in India. After the success of the subsidy scheme for mobile phones, the government is hoping to achieve the same success with PLI scheme for computers, laptops, small form factor devices and servers. The aim is to boost domestic manufacturing and attract large investments in the value chain. The budgetary allocation for this scheme is around 17,000 crore rupees. At least 42 companies have shown interest, including the likes of Dell, HP, Lenovo, Acer and Thomson. This scheme will also provide an additional incentive to companies who procure components locally. But is this enough to bridge the cost disparity when compared to procuring finished goods and components from China or Vietnam? Joining us now to talk about this scheme are Rahul Sharma, co-founder, Zetwerk; Anurag Avasthi, Vice President, India Electronics and Semiconductor Association; Sunil Vachani, co-founder and Executive Chairman of Dixon Technologies. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Sunil Vachani, if I may begin with you, how do you see PLI 2.0 for IT hardware manufacturing contributing to the growth of your companies and new areas that you're excited about?
If you look at the objectives of the PLI scheme, that when this scheme was initially thought of, what were the initial objectives? I think, to my mind, one of the key objectives of PLI was to create large scale for Indian companies, because let's appreciate that scale eventually leads to global competitiveness. So I think this was badly required. I think another idea was also to create Indian champions. Indian champions who can have large scale, who can invest in backward integration, and over a period of time who can be large global players. Another objective also is to create large employment across many states in India. And finally, I think also create a robust component ecosystem. And I think if we look at the schemes that have already been implemented, something like mobile phone, where it's I think already been 2.5 years since the scheme was launched, I think the scheme has checked all the boxes that I talked about. We have managed to create very large scale. I believe there is an incremental production of almost 80,000 crores that has happened after the PLI scheme. We have managed to build Indian champions who are investing heavily into creating very, very large scale and mega factories. We've also created large employment. I believe the employment generated through the mobile scheme alone is almost 500,000 people. And of course, now we're also on the way of creating a component ecosystem. So I think I would say that the scheme that has been launched already, the mobile scheme, has been a big success. And I see the same thing happening across the IT hardware also. Right. And I think the initial reaction to the scheme has been positive, with many companies having been applied, committing to, again, creating a very large scale in the IT hardware ecosystem.
Rahul, if I were to get you in, now Zetwerk has plans to go big with consumer electronics, battery management systems, electric vehicles. How do you see the PLI scheme, the PLI 2.0, feeding your aspirations for the future?
So PLI is not only helping the folks who have applied for the PLI, but it's also creating champions for folks who can be called a PLI enabler. Once the assembly part kicks in, there is the need for all the component to be manufactured in the country as well. And that's where we feel that we'll be able to collaborate with a lot of PLI holders to create the backend infrastructure so that we can push forward the whole domestication of the supply chain. And that's where we feel we have the role to play. At the same time, there are different categories. I think the first category to move would be laptops. We are also excited about servers. We're excited about IFPDs. So there are a lot of different supply chain that exist, which might be left open for people who don't have the PLI, but can collaborate with PLI holders and bring in that manufacturing. So a lot of white space. In next few months, years and quarters, we'll see how it plays out for everyone.
Rahul, you've also mentioned how you're expanding your manufacturing capacity here in Noida for consumer electronics. Give us a sense of the order book that you have from PLI applicants currently, and how could this grow over the next 6 years?
I think lately we have been part of the phased manufacturing program of the government. That's where we have been working on the hearable wearable space. In terms of PLI, I think is yet to be awarded the PLI 2.0, but we've seen vast amount of interest from a lot of brands and manufacturers in terms of collaboration. Of course, all of it is in paper unless it is executed over the next few months. The exact order book amount would be visible once the PLI gets awarded.
Sunil Vachani, when we speak about laptops, computers, servers for that matter, very little manufacturing and very basic assembly is taking place in India right now. How do you expect this sector, India's footprint in these industries, in these devices to grow over the next 6 years? Is there a kind of industry estimate that you can give to us?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the sector currently, as you mentioned, we are importing on a massive scale. I believe the imports is almost about $10 to $12 billion worth of IT hardware that is happening. And I feel that after into next few years, after the PLI scheme is launched and companies have set up their manufacturing capabilities, I see at least about 50% of this being manufactured in India. And eventually 100% of it, the first level of manufacturing happening in India.
All right. So you see strong trends towards local assembly and local manufacturing over the next 6 to 10 years. Mr. Awasthi, coming to you, and I'd like to ask you about how is Semicon likely to complement the PLI-led growth in IT hardware? Yes, we want to be a powerhouse when it comes to telecom manufacturing and IT hardware. How important is the semiconductor play here? Because we were extremely vulnerable. The whole world was vulnerable when semiconductor manufacturing was hit due to COVID-19.
When you look at PLI from a very policy, related prism, we have to understand that PLI bridges the gap between the government and the industry, so to say. It also caters for one very simple logic, that the government has the economy of scales but a lower technical expertise, where the industry has a higher technical expertise but lower volume of scales. So it bridges that gap. In addition to that, it also fosters a huge amount of competitiveness and also fosters qualitative ecosystem being developed. Now, semiconductors being the new oil, this PLI, what the government has already pushed in ever since the Indian semiconductor policy came into being in the December of 2021, I think is going to be a game changer. When you look at the postulates of this policy, the PLI, so to say, in the semiconductor domain, and you look at what the center government is offering and what the state governments, the associated state governments which are wanting to now build up this semiconductor ecosystem are offering, I think it's the best in the world. I don't think you can get better than this. With a 50% pari passu, I mean, if you go through this, it is a recipe for success. A lot of naysayers also say that, why would the government put in so much of, impetus and subsidy into the semiconductors and so on and so forth. But history has demonstrated, even if you look at Taiwan or TSMC, or you look at China, or you look at any other big country in the world, which has a very, very thriving semiconductor ecosystem today, in whichever form it has always been kick-started by the government. So the government is very astute in its policy insofar as the PLI in the semiconductor space is concerned.
Right.
And it's going to be giving out very, very great results in the next, say, possibly 5 to 6 years.
Rahul, what about you? With the semiconductor ecosystem coming up, and there are different states who want to attract these big companies, and every state wants to have a good record of having good companies and being able to attract global players. How do you look to benefit from a semiconductor ecosystem in India?
I think the aspect that we have talked about, how do we become competitive after the PLI gets over, it's one of the things. Today we are going to manufacture, probably assemble a lot of goods which are incentivized by the government. Once the PLI goes over, one that would help us is economies of scale. That will drive the cost down. Another thing would be further localization. There's limitation to how much localization you can do in electronics, because a large part of it comes from semiconductor. Now that doesn't exist in the country today. Hopefully when the PLI period gets over, which is say 3 to 4 years from now, the semiconductor wave will start coming in, and the same PLI holders who don't have the PLI anymore will benefit out of sourcing from all these companies who are based out of the country. And another government policy push where they will push probably to buy only from the local market, and that in itself will enable growth for the domestic demand and enable the manufacturers to sell outside the country as well.
All right. On that note, we take a short break, but we request all our panelists, Sunil Vachani, Rahul and Anurag Awasthi, to stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You are watching our special broadcast on PLI-led growth in IT hardware manufacturing and building India's IT hardware legacy. We continue to be joined by Rahul Sharma, co-founder Zetwerk, Anurag Avasthi, Vice President, India Electronics and Semiconductor Association, Sunil Vachani, co-founder and Executive Chairman, Dixon Technologies. Mr. Vachani, if we were to speak about the IT hardware industry specifically right now, what is the kind of cost disability we face when we compare ourselves to China or Vietnam? Also, what was the roadmap that governments in these countries deployed over a 20-year period, over the last 2 decades, to be where they are right now?
Yeah, so I think there is no doubt that a scheme like PLI, one of the primary objectives is to ensure that the disabilities that are there in the system, the manufacturers are compensated for that. And I think let's try and look at that. What are these disabilities? So I think if you look at the cost of manpower, definitely India has an advantage. If you look at productivity, I think India is as good, if not better, than its neighboring countries. I think a lot of people are surprised when I make that statement. But I think it's proven time and time again that given the right kind of environment to the Indian operators, we can be as productive, if not better. I think the problem comes as far as the logistics cost is concerned. And I think because of the infrastructure that we have, logistics cost is a major disadvantage. And I think another big issue is the lack of a robust and strong component ecosystem. So what it means is that we end up importing a lot of our components, which adds to the disability. I think a study was done by one of the big 4 companies where they mentioned that the disability is somewhere around 7 to 8%, currently manufacturing in India. And I think if you see, the PLI is definitely taking care of that. And the fact that the exports in our sector have been growing by almost 55 to 60% every year proves the fact that the PLI is working and the PLI is taking care of the disabilities that are there in the system. So if you remember the figures correctly, our exports in the ICT sector, which includes information, communication, technology, and electronics, were almost about $25 billion. And I think we will be the number 5 in terms of the ranking list of the top exports in the country. So I think there's no doubt that the PLI scheme is definitely helping in that. But for something like an IT hardware PLI, what I see happening is that the first level of manufacturing is going to be happening for primarily catering to the domestic market. Let's appreciate that this product is an item which attracts 0 customs duty, right? It is under the IT1. So we've been used to very, very large imports, a scale of imports happening into the country. So the first opportunity is going to be to address the domestic market, which is also going to be very large, as I mentioned, at almost $11 billion.
Rahul, if I were to ask you, yes, that component supply chain for the IT hardware industry is in a nascent stage in India. What are the opportunities that you see? What are the components that you're making currently? And which are the areas that you'd like to get into over the next 6 years?
I think we're looking at manufacturing batteries. This is something which almost goes into all kind of electronic components. At the same time, camera modules is another something which we have been looking at both for the CCTV cameras as well as the cameras that go into mobiles. These are 2 particular areas where we have been really excited. Other than that, we have been really good at industrial manufacturing. So how do we go into aluminum extrusion, die casting, and the stuff which actually goes on the exterior part, where India has not been really best in terms of quality. That's something which we have been investing heavily upon and hope to benefit out of the PLI scheme.
Are you also having to invest and put a lot of mind into complying with the PLI requirements? While you might not be a beneficiary directly, but in order to cater to your clients, are you trying to tailor your processes, your design, your industry, your processes around the PLI scheme?
Of course, all of these facilities, all of this investment go hand in hand with the customer and the PLI holders. How do we work with them to create a cohesive ecosystem, right? Even the position of the factory is dependent upon where the actual assembly would happen, so as to reduce the logistic cost, so as to reduce the kind of back and forth that is required between 2 widely spread across manufacturing facilities. So all of this happened hand in hand. At the same time, it has to be world class. You need to match up to the standards of the globe. The consumer will not accept an inferior product because it's manufactured in the country. So we ensure that we are delivering the same quality that the consumer accept, at the same time deliver the cost at which he will buy it.
Right. Mr. Avasthi, coming to you, when it comes to green processes, sustainability, this has to be at the core of new manufacturing facilities coming up. How important are these terms to both semiconductor manufacturing and IT hardware manufacturing in the country?
When you look at the sustainability aspects in this, I think most of them are now getting dovetailed into the policy. See, we in India have a very distinct advantage. When you look at a large amount of these facilities which have been made all over the world, including fabrication facilities for semiconductors all over the world, they're all late 90s, early 2000 vintage. That is the time you would agree there was nothing like, the SDGs or green processes or sustainability. I mean, these were words, but they were esoteric for people to understand as to what they were and what they meant. But now, having said that, when you look at the semiconductors, so to say, and when you look at the fabrication facilities, they impose a large carbon footprint, So how do you get rid of them? India is a world leader in renewable energy, the solar power, which is coming up in such a great manner. So insofar as the electricity is concerned, you can look at it that way. Water, we'll have to look at ways to recycle water. We'll have to look at greener processes inside the processes, lesser reliance over the gases and chemicals and minerals which are being used, newer materials which can be we can use to make these processes a little more less cumbersome and less, pliable to more environmental norms, so on and so forth. So if you look at it that way, I think we are on a great start. So since we are building things from bottoms up and we are dovetailing all these things into our processes, we stand to a huge advantage.
Okay, my final round of questions. We'll take quick closing comments from all our panelists. Sunil Vichani, starting from you, what would be one or two key expectations that you have from the government? A lot has already been done, but in terms of a long-term roadmap for the industry to continue investing, is there any kind of clarity or enabling policies that the IT hardware industry in India needs?
So I think one of the key challenges, according to me, has to be creation of a vibrant component ecosystem. And I think if we look at the PLI that came in, immediately after the mobile phone manufacturing PLI, that was for encouraging investments in the component ecosystem. To my mind, that really wasn't as successful as the industry and the government expected it to be. And I think one of the primary reasons was that, again, like IT hardware, electronic components, most of the electronic components also fall under IT1, wherein we have zero customs duty. And this has not been now, this has been there for the last maybe, I think, 20 years, right, when the ITA1 agreement was signed. And I think at that stage, the industry really wasn't mature enough, to fight imports. And as a result, if you see, there is hardly any component ecosystem. So I think one would expect, a new PLI coming in for encouraging investments in the, component sector and a much bigger ratio of investment to incentive. So if you look at the last PLI scheme, these few schemes that have come in for the component ecosystem, the investment to incentive ratio is very low. It's hardly 1:0.9. If you compare it with, let's say, the IT hardware, the mobile, where it's almost 1:7.5. So I think we'll need a much bigger scheme with a much bigger outlay and much more attractive terms, so that we can really get our MSMEs to invest in the sector. Because let's appreciate that the backbone of any component ecosystem, even in our neighboring countries, is their MSMEs. So I think that's very important to look at when we look at the next scheme.
Right. Rahul, coming to you, would that be your aspiration as well? Have a PLI scheme specifically designed for the IT hardware component space?
One is that, and of course another is the incentivization to the startups. So that they can come up with newer design and technology which complements with the manufacturing aspect and brings in a lot more value add, which is not only material but also in terms of the design, the software that is on top of the manufactured product. And another is how do we create pockets of skilling across the country. That of course is a challenge for anyone new coming in. For incumbents, sometimes it's easier because they have a training playground, whereas for new guys, it really requires that push from the government to help in terms of providing manpower to start the operation as fast as possible.
Right. Anurag Avasthi, any final thoughts from you, any key asks from the government on how to progress on both these fronts, PLI on IT hardware, semicon, and make sure that once these schemes reach their threshold, or we complete this 5 to 6 year period, 10-year period under these schemes, we don't need another set of incentives.
Correct. See, my closing comments would be initially, first we need to really focus on skilling. I think skilling is going to be the Achilles heel of everybody across the world, like what Rahul has just brought out. I think skilling is the key to do everything. For this, I think you need to look at all 4 tiers. The technical tier, that is, enabling your ITIs and all that entire infrastructure, which looks at the lower end of the spectrum. The undergrad tier, in which there is a large amount of impetus where people are concerned and are happy about choosing electronics and electrical engineering over the computer science engineering, which has been the traditional choice for the last around 2 or 3 decades. Then the postgraduate level, where you get enough faculty as well as your own guys to keep at it and train them, and of course at a doctor level where you don't have too many people going out. So when you look at these 4 segments together, and there's a task force in place by METI, and there's a task force in place by the skill development the institutes in India looking at this aspect. And the second thing which I would say very importantly is that we really need to plug into the global value chains and the global supply chains. As Mr. Vachani brought out the logistics, as we talked about China and Vietnam, the warehousing part, and absolutely going inside the global value chains, this is going to be very critical in times to come, in terms of PLI and all other associated aspects.
Right. So skilling, reducing the logistics cost, and building an IT hardware component ecosystem in India would be very important when it comes to India becoming a powerhouse for IT hardware manufacturing. On that note, we end this special broadcast. Thank you very much to Sunil Vachani, Anurag Avasthi and Rahul for joining us. That's all we have time for. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.